Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is an old friend of the show. It's the grand poobah of the comics site, The Beat. It's Heidi MacDonald. Thanks for coming on, Heidi.
Hello, David. Well, I resent the term poobah, but sure, I'll take it.
What does that even mean? I think I just got that from cartoons when I was a kid.
Yeah, grandee. That's the one the Ankler uses, the Hollywood grandee. I don't know. I'm not a grandee for sure. I'm a doyen.
I don't know what that means. It's not a comic book term, so apparently I didn't get it.
I know. I guess a czarina. I don't know. I have to figure out a word. Duchess. The Duchess.
Okay, the Grand Duchess of the Beat.
Yes, there you go. Sounds better than a poobah.
That does sound fancier. I like that. But so we're recording this on Tuesday, May 2nd. It's the week of Free Comic Book Day, so every retailer is losing their mind right now. How are you doing, though? Are you ready for the busiest day in comics retail?
I rarely participate in Free Comic Book Day. I mean, there is a comic shop very close to me, my beloved JHU Comics, so I will probably go. But as someone who doesn't like crowded stores, especially in these days, it's kind of a day that I avoid the comic shop. But also, we write about it. You know, we cover it on The Beat, like we promote it. And so to me, that's my part. You know, David, let's be honest. I don't need more comics.
Does anyone, though?
Some people, I suppose, do, but there's one person who does not. It is Heidi MacDonald. The reason my background is blurred is because I don't have David's books are beautifully arranged in his bookcase, but mine are just piling up like, you know, some kind of Gormenghast type thing. I need to update that reference. What's more gothic than Gormenghast?
I have no idea. My maximum gothic is basically like Winona Ryder's 80s roles, which isn't that gothic to begin with. I have no idea. Man, we've had a lot of analysis of terms so far, even though we're only like 2 minutes in.
I know.
Grand Duchess, and we got to update some gothic terms.
Gormenghast. Yeah. All right. Well, let's get to it.
Yeah. I do want to comment on the Free Comic Book Day part of it because
yes.
I was going to ask you if you participate. It makes sense that you don't, but I do think it's one of the interesting things about kind of what you do at The Beat, because you do a lot of analysis of the business, you do a lot of analysis of direct market things, and yet a lot of the traditional direct market things, going to Free Comic Book Day, even like, I believe, like reading single issues on the regular, are not really things you do, are they?
No, but I mean, you know, when I started in this profession, or in, you know, as a collector, as a kid collector, collecting comic books, that's all there was, you know. Mm-hmm. And so now the comics industry has expanded so much to cover so many other things, you know. I mean, it's like we were saying at some context about all this, you know, when you go to Five Below, they sell manga there now, you know, and there's comics everywhere. So, I mean, one of the things about Free Comic Book Day is like, literally, I don't need free comics. And also, honestly, I don't think there's any temperature to take.
Sure.
On Free Comic Book Day. It's so individualized to each store. You know, I support my local store in other ways. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have digital copies. Let's be honest. I have digital copies of a lot of the free comics. So do you go to Free Comic Book Day?
Oh, yeah. I love Free Comic Book. I mean, my shop has like a high school band that comes and performs. They have like the 501st Legion that comes. It's this like big deal.
Oh, so you make a big holiday out of it.
Oh yeah, it's like full out festivities and everything. So I enjoy it because it's designed to be enjoyed very specifically for everyone when you go to it. So it's not even just about the free comics, but also I like supporting my shop when it's like that. I also know that it's not for everyone. I mean, that's the funny thing is like Free Comic Book Day fundamentally is not designed for people like you or I. They don't need to onboard us. They onboarded us a long time ago.
That's what I'm saying. It's not, why should I take a free comic that might help somebody else? But, you know, now you made me feel guilty. I'm going to go to JHU for sure and check it out and talk to, you know, hopefully Nick will be there, or if he's not, I'll, you know, whatever. I'll take the temperature. Are you happy? I'm temperature taken, David.
Well, the funny thing is you're right, though. There's not much of a temperature to be taken because it's like the one day that's designed to be like pure, like good in comics in theory.
But David, the thing is, there has been some discourse about Free Comic Book Day of late. Okay.
What?
Yes. And there was, I think it might have been Ryan Higgins, I think you've had him on the show, right?
I have an article on Thursday going up about Free Comic Book Day that features Ryan Higgins.
Okay. Well, there you go. So, but so maybe it was Ryan who tweeted that, why isn't Free Comic Book Day more like Record Store Day, with, publishers could support it with variants and rarities that you could actually sell. So it'd be a way to make money. Now, I understand the, impetus behind Free Comic Book Day, that when it was started, it really was a way to just say, hey, comic books are here and here they are a thing. And local comic shop day, which is, another diamond holiday. I think it's in November, right? They were like, oh, that's more like Free Comic Book Day. So, I mean, a lot of people, I'm not going to say Free Comic Book Day is a bad thing. It's a really good thing. And, it's been around for so long, it's going to stick around. But I do think that, it's more, some of the purpose of it might have shifted a little bit in the 20 years that it's been around.
I would agree with that. I mean, Free Comic Book, this isn't the focus of the podcast, but so the last thing I'll say on it is, like, Free Comic Book Day, I think, is a good and fun thing, but at the same time, has it delivered on its central goal of building a bigger audience? Probably not, but it's given away a lot of free comics and brought joy to people 21 consecutive years. Probably. Let's assume that something good is going to happen.
Yes, I am severely underestimating the amount of joy that Free Comic Book Day has brought, so I yield you on that. I should embrace its joyfulness.
Yes. Embrace the joy. All right. So now that we've established that we're going to embrace the joy, let's get into the misery. Woo!
Man.
I'm just kidding. So I've been on vacation for the past while, and I thought it'd be a good idea to catch up with you and get perspective from one of the best on some of the big news that hit basically over the past month plus. It is really kind of wild how much big news and big changes have dropped in, like, since I would say it really started with the Ike Perlmutter stuff at Marvel at the end of March. And since then, there's just been massive things. There's IDW's layoffs and reorganization. There's the DSTLRY launch. There's the BookScan data dropping. There's everything going on with library budgets and books being challenged. I mean, there's even the WGA strike, which is tangentially connected, and that really hit yesterday.
And I would have to say, like, last Monday was really kind of like, it just, everything became very surreal, because we woke up and just the pace was accelerating. Like, everybody woke up and was like, oh, it's the Disney layoff day, right? Disney's laying off 4,000 people. And then it was like, oh, but Tucker Carlson went first. And then it was Don Lemon went. And then, I was just on Twitter, and every 5 minutes there was like, Kevin Smith had to check himself into a, mental health facility because he was depressed. And it was just, like a Babylon 5's coming back. It was just like every...
Vice is like filing for bankruptcy. And
filing bankruptcy. And then it was Clubhouse, set off all those people. And, BuzzFeed News is done. And then IDW is done. And IDW isn't done, by the way. But, yes, last week, you're right. It has been a boulder rolling down a hill. And then last week was just like the craziest.
I do think it's funny, though, because you can kind of look at the beat and just see how many articles you're writing to get a good sense as to how many big news items there are, because there's like, I don't want to say that there's like a class system or something to the beat, but at the same time, if there's really big news, you're going to write it. And if it's like kind of more like day-to-day things, you're not going to write it. And you've been writing a lot lately.
I have, but I will say I am training my staff, or, encouraging. Training is definitely the wrong word, but I am encouraging them to pitch in with their own insights. And we've brought some really good pieces by them. There was a piece about like Marvel, the more historical, like there was a piece about Marvel's digital history by Cy Beltran that ran yesterday that I thought was really, really good. And so I am, yes, you're right. I do handle the big news stories. That's what I do. I'm trying to make sure I'm not the only person who knows how to do that, because I think we've talked about it here before. You and I were on the plane and then stopped, and we picked up, Milton Greep.
Yep.
And then the plane disappeared in Alaska.
We're done. Which is a possibility. It is Alaska. There's a lot to choose from. I'm curious if let's go back to, we were talking about sports beforehand. If you had to make a number one draft pick on like what you thought the biggest news from the past month plus was in comics in specific, what are you picking?
Well, I do think Ike Perlmutter being removed at Marvel is the culmination of 25 years of being a bastard. And I mean, that's like a huge storyline. That's like the episode of Succession, right?
Yeah.
That was, the Red Wedding for comics. That is just a huge, huge, huge story. I think the effects of it will not be as huge as just the actual event. I think the actual event is just really seismic in terms of his legacy and everything that he did, and good and bad. I mean, Ike is a very good businessman. He's a very smart businessman.
In some ways.
In some ways, but I am an Icheologist. I have been studying this guy for 20 years. So that's, I guess, why I think it's a big story, right?
Well, to be fair, I have not been studying him for 20 years, and it is undeniably a big story. And there are very few things that can make all of comics stop and talk about it in the way that story did. And just for listeners that don't know, Ike Perlmutter, who had previously owned Marvel, sold it to Disney, and then what was his title? Chairman, yeah. Chairman of Marvel Entertainment, not studios. Very, very important distinction there that one he very much did not enjoy. And associates, they were laid off. Dan Buckley stuck around as president, reporting to Kevin Feige still. And Marvel, the kind of sub-headline that became the headline, then became the sub-headline again, was that Marvel Entertainment was considered redundant and will be, I quote, folded into larger Disney business units. It is kind of interesting, though, because I think you could make an argument, despite him being a smart man and despite the fact that what you're saying is true. Like, he didn't want this to be the result. But in some ways, you could look at what he'd been doing in recent memory as effectively the equivalent of when George in Seinfeld was trying to get fired by the Yankees for a while. And I mean, he was going off. Like, everything he could do to infuriate basically every person there, he was going for it. Like, with all this stuff with the board and everything that's going on. But I'm curious because we have some distance from it now. The day it hit, concerns were high, even if Schadenfreude was as well. What are you hearing? Like, do you think the concerns are warranted, or does it not appear to be as frightening as it initially seemed to be?
For Marvel Comics, I don't think it's frightening at all.
I don't either.
I'm hearing that from people internal. I'm hearing it from my other sources. It's like this Monday, I was asking all my people, like, last Monday, it's like, do you think Marvel's going to get hit in this round of layoffs? And they're like, we're not hearing that. And to my knowledge, there were no layoffs at Marvel Comics. And, David, the thing is, like, if I was going to be a fangirl, I am just fangirling about Bob Iger. I am sorry. That guy, dude, it was a surgical strike. It was a beautiful surgical strike that left no humiliation unturned for Ike. And, the reality is, and all the things that Bob Iger, who, is the chairman of Disney, and he's just one of the smartest executives in Hollywood. But, he's revealed more and more of the things that he and Ike Perlmutter clashed over the years. And, just enough. Each time he reveals a little bit more to undermine Ike a little bit more. And this is in the run up to fill everybody in. And it's so delicious that you really have to enjoy every step of it. But, basically, Ike got sidelined by Marvel and Kevin Feige because he was being an asshole. And then over the last year, he's been trying to stage a comeback on the Disney board through his proxy, who was another 80-year-old Florida billionaire. And they just sit around. I mean, I'm not going to imitate 80-year-old Florida billionaires, but, like, what's going on with Disney? I guess I did imitate them. But, Ike tried to get this guy on the board, and, there was all the disaster with Bob Chapek, and which just threw into sharp relief what a great executive Bob Iger was. And then, Bob had to step back in, and then he comes back and there's this whole, activist investor. Let's circle back to activist investor, okay? Because that's my word for the week. And Ike is pissing off Disney Bob by trying to get him removed from the board and put in this absolutely unqualified, cheap old geezer, right? And who has no understanding of the entertainment business at all. So Ike was just being such a pain in the butt to Bob Iger. So, every time he removes a little bit more, like he fended off the activist investors, unfortunately, by promising to lay off 7,000 people. I believe it had been Ike and his Norman pelts. It would have been more like 20,000 people. So, he saved as many as he could. He's like, oh, yeah, they're like, well, what do you think of Ike Perlmutter? And he's like, oh, well, we've just had an interesting relationship. Like there was the time he tried to get me to fire Kevin Feige. It's like, boom. What? Right? Like every time he reveals just a little bit more of what a deluded jerk Ike Perlmutter is. And then this final strike, it was just, Monday morning, called him up, didn't even have the board meeting, just like, oh, yeah, you're laid off. Like, you told us, oh, we had to lay off some people. Guess what? You're one of them, Mike. And they had to get rid of Marvel Entertainment in order to do this because of the contract. But you noticed it was like they laid off 4 other people, and then one of them was Ike's enforcer.
Was he like a security like consultant or something? And like
Mhm.
every time that person was described, it changed in slightly more nefarious ways. It was very strange.
Right. But if you Googled him, it was like there was a leak, like somebody leaked an unfinished version of some Disney movie, and this guy came into Marvel Studios in California and did some kind of forensic, inquisition. So I mean, this guy was, Ike's man who came in and did all this digging around. Yeah, you didn't want to cross this guy. So yeah, it was just absolutely surgical strike, and Ike was gone.
It is interesting though because the natural takeaway when you hear words like redundant being involved with companies, the fear is the worst. And
Yes.
my thing, and we talked about this on Twitter, privately, but at the same time, we're talking now, so let's just talk about it. Is I think we both kind of came around on saying that this probably wasn't going to be a big deal as soon as we saw that Dan Buckley was sticking around, because
Right.
if you're gonna like just get rid of Marvel Comics, why would you keep Dan Buckley around too?
Yeah.
You wouldn't.
Yeah.
It by from what I've heard, it doesn't seem like it's really affecting anything right now. Who knows what the next few years have? I have no idea. I do think it's funny though. You're an Ikeologist and you're an Iger fangirl. There's like you have like a Disney power rankings, it seems.
I do. I do. I mean, I just really, I just don't like Ike because he really hurt a lot of people,
He's
you
terrible.
know,
Yeah.
and yeah. And I, like I said, I do recognize the fact that he's a very good businessman in a lot of ways, but he, by his own admission, he has a mental health issue in that he is a chronic miser. There is an OCD. It goes beyond OCD called miserliness. And the best part was that when he finally spoke out and gave a statement, he said, what was the word he used? I don't want to mess up the word, but he says, as you know, I have been completely focused on, but it wasn't the word focused. It was a word that was more obsessed. I'll have to look it up, but he admitted that he's obsessed with saving money to the point of fishing paper clips out of the garbage.
Yeah. I was gonna say, isn't that always the shorthand that like they would reuse paper clips?
Yeah, well, there
That's
was
so wild.
right, but I mean, the worst thing was another time they only were allowed one roll of toilet paper, and he was just obsessive. He was obsessive. I got to find the word because it's such a good word that he used.
From like a broader impact standpoint, of course, like probably the biggest issue is the fact that they kept a lot of their books out of print because it cost money. So like that is pretty bonkers. But
Oh, the word was fixation. Anyone who knows me is well aware of my fixation on fiscal discipline to improve efficiency. So, in his own words, I just want to say, in his own words, he knew that he was fixated. And yes, the problem was that this severely hampered Marvel's, trade program.
fiscal discipline is a pretty amazing phrase. I mean, that was a very well cultivated sentence right there. But I do think it's interesting, though, that you picked this as the number one, because I think from a pure conversational standpoint, like I imagine your DMs and your private conversations were through the roof about this subject.
Yeah.
From that standpoint, from a conversational standpoint, this is massive. From an actual impact standpoint, in terms of Marvel, in terms of Disney, really probably not that significant, because I think Buckley was already at least co-reporting to
Yes.
Feige. And if it's not impacting the day-to-day business, it's not going to be significant. Disney is just, all it is like shuffling. Well, I was going to say shuffling deck chairs, but that has a natural Titanic connection. It was moving stuff around to make it, from all accounts, or many accounts, it was making them able to get rid of Ike in a clean way. And so it's interesting how, from a conversational standpoint, massive. From an actual impact standpoint, maybe not so much.
Right. But I yes, we haven't even mentioned Ike's politics, but he's like a best friend of Donald Trump. And one of the reasons that he kind of stopped being so fixated on Marvel was that he went off and was fixated on helping fix,
The
quote unquote,
VA.
the VA during the Trump administration. He was like a shadow cabinet member. Here's a story that I haven't told. I didn't tell it on the beat. because it's really the kind of story that you have to tell over on a podcast or embark on. So you're the first that I've told this story to, but it's pretty well known. But I guess it was maybe 2003, 2004, and there was a while that Marvel did not have a booth at San Diego Comic-Con. Okay, and it was because Ike was cheap; they didn't want to pay for it. So they got around it by saying, but when you went to the con, there was a very small, like, pipe and drape table, okay, that was in like the front of the room, and like had 3 or 4 tables, and they had people doing signings. And this is like Ultimates. I mean, this is like the prime time for Marvel. So it's like, they have the hottest books and the hottest creators. And so they did do signings at this really ad hoc booth. And then somebody who worked for DC came up and told me, was like, oh, you know how they did this, right? And I was like, no. He said, well, they're on the books. They're just doing a promotion with Oreo to give away cookies. So the way they got the booth was that they needed to have this place to do this giveaway with Oreos. And then on the Sunday of the con, we went to the booth and pulled back the curtain, and there was boxes and boxes of cookies sitting there.
Oh my God. That's amazing. Also, I love Oreos, so this is a great story.
I know. It is a good story, yes.
That is so weird.
I'm pretty sure I have some photos of it. It was before the cell phone, but I had my little digital camera. So if I dug around in my archives, I might be able to find some pictures of this cookie. So
I was hoping that you still had a box of the Oreos that you could share at the next con, because they're probably still good.
Cookies do not last here.
I don't blame you.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. Bad Idea is back, and they're bringing their biggest book yet, Megalith. Megalith is an epic of unparalleled detail and artistry. It's the result of a mammoth 5-year production journey where no expense was spared, and a monument such as this demands an equally worthy presentation, and Bad Idea needs your help to make that a reality. In 2018, Matt Kint and Louis LaRosa set to create a comic book without the constraints of time and with an unrivaled budget. Joined by electric colorist Laura Martin and veteran letterer Taylor Esposito, what resulted from their efforts is an event comic unlike any before it. The comic book only known by its code name, Megalith. A comic book of such breathtaking beauty that it needs to be seen to be believed. This magnum opus of Bad Ideas hitting Kickstarter soon, with this crowdfunding effort focused on promoting the release into comic shops. So if you're a comic shop and you want Megalith in your stores, keep an eye on Kickstarter for just that. And now, back to the show.
Well, let's move on to the next subject. You covered this one last week at great lengths, IDW's layoffs and reorganization. To lay it out, the story goes, they went dark on the New York Stock Exchange, meaning they basically were delisted by choice after the stock plummeted to untenable levels. Then they laid off 39% of its employees, including all marketing and half of editorial, with some of the names being the ones at top, including the CEO and CFO being replaced, and the publisher was laid off. And also, I have to say, like, your note from unnamed sources in your article saying that they were let go in a Zoom meeting where the meeting lasted approximately 5 or less than 5 minutes is absolutely insane. But it's not like IDW is completely going away. They're reorienting around Mark Doyle and Tara McGrillis as co-publishers, with Jamie Rich, Scott Dunbier, and Heather Antos, as well as others sticking around.
Yeah, Top Shelf. Very important to mention that Top Shelf is still there. Lee Walton and Chris, he's the editor. He's kind of the top guy at Top Shelf now.
It is interesting, though, because it seems like, besides, was it Nachi Marsham was the former publisher? It seems like for the most part, like, kind of the top comics people stuck around. It seems like mostly it was, I don't know. It seemed like some of the moves were, I know that they were struggling with media efforts after Lock and Key, so there was some stuff with that. But, let's agree from the beginning that any time this sort of thing happens, it's terrible. And that we, obviously wish the best of luck going forward to everyone no longer there and still there. But I have to ask, IDW's been, I don't know how to put it, in a constant state of flux, let's say that, for the last few years.
Yes.
More than that, I know that, like, there's been a bevy of direct market publishers going through massive change of late. Was this surprising to you?
0%. I was surprised at how extensive it was, but I was not surprised that they reorganized. I'm going to read you something that one of my little sources said, because it's just such a perfect summation of what happened. During the biggest boom we've seen in years, from sales in bookstores to the emergence of Kickstarter to the rising value of comics IPs, somehow IDW managed to have multiple years of poor business.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't surprise me because IDW is publicly traded. So you could go and read every quarter, you could read their financials, and you could see that they were not doing well. I mean, I will say that the man who is the principal stockholder of IDW is a guy named Howard Jonas, who is very much like Ike Perlmutter. He is another self-made billionaire. Ike is from Israeli. Jonas, I believe, is Orthodox Jewish. And, they're these kind of New York, I call them New York Post type people, like their doings are in the New York Post, although Ike was very secretive. But Howard Jonas is all over. They both give a lot of money to charity. It's worth pointing out. But I think for a long time, IDW flew under the radar as just a division of this very successful fintech company, IDT. And for whatever reason, over the last few years, it stopped flying under the radar.
It is interesting, though. I mean, even beyond the publicly traded part of it, so many of the things that were going on, like, losing licenses, for example, like that was a massive deal. Because for the most part, I mean, I would say the average comic fan knows IDW is a licensed company for the, Transformers, G.I. Joe, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They've had a lot of different licenses over the years. It's hard not to see those losses and see some of the changes that were being made and and also like them constantly trying to figure out what the best fit is. Like they brought in Mark Doyle and Jamie Rich to kind of, mostly Mark Doyle to kind of build up the originals line and all these things like that. And one of the things that's kind of always thrown me off is it's always seemed, especially of late, that IDW doesn't really know what they are. And it didn't really have an identity within the market. I think you described it in one of your articles as one of the top 5 direct market publishers. I don't think it is one of the top 5 anymore.
It is. Yeah. Well, it might not be anymore, but it has consistently been one of the top 5, and maybe I think if you could make it the top 6.
Yeah. Top 6. Yeah. I think you could.
Absolutely. With maybe Boom or Dynamite, like the top 4, big 2, Marvel, DC, Image, and Dark Horse after that.
No,
and
Boom.
Then I would say Boom and Dynamite and IDW. But IDW was in the top. They were the number 3 a few times, actually. They had some big sales. They had some very popular comics. And I wrote one pretty deep dive, just giving a lot of background. But, there's just so much more to talk about with IDW. And one of the things is that it was founded by 4 people who were very smart and had very different designs or different sensibilities, different skills, like money men and designers and editorial people. And one of them is Ted Adams, who really became the public face of IDW. Ted really did a great job running IDW, and ever since he left, which I think was 2017 or 18, it's been a lot of problems. And there's been so much turmoil at the top of the company. Ted was, I believe, the CEO and president. And then there's been like 3 or 4 CEOs since then, and like 3 or 4 publishers since then.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a topsy-turvy last few years for them.
Yeah.
And I just kind of feel like they've been lacking an identity. But I'm curious as to your perspective, because a lot of this, I think, comes down to approach for IDW. But also, I mean, do you think this is a reflection of the overall market as much as IDW's approaches? Because it seems like what has happened quite often with some of these publishers is they're making some bets and those bets are not necessarily paying off. Do you think it's one of those situations, or do you think it's just IDW still figuring itself out and they needed to make some changes?
I'm not sure, honestly. I'm not sure. I do think the market is soft right now, and the market is as you were the one who said it when you talked to the retailers, that there was a lot of periodical comics coming out that nobody wanted, not that nobody wanted, but that didn't have a clear audience. And right. I mean, basically over the last 2 years during the pandemic, when sales were soaring, we saw everybody launch a new line of periodicals, right? And I mean, I've pointed this out several times. I'll be honest, I talked about this with Ted Adams. I talked about it with people at IDW over the years, saying you don't have enough original IP.
Mm-hmm.
And, being a licensed comics publisher is fine, but what's your equity? Like why did Transformers left? And then what do you have now? So you have to build your own franchises. You have to build your own. I mean, I would say, honestly, like Like Dynamite is also a licensed publishing company, but they just seem to be a lot more, I'm always, look, I mean, I know Dynamite's had some issues, but I'm always like, they've actually done shockingly well. Okay.
They're effective at monetizing what they do.
They are. And they're the only comics publisher that doesn't have VC money. They don't have investors. They just run it on their own. So I give them props for that. But, they're also licensed, but they do it so. If you were to say like Dynamite doesn't own Vampirella and Red Sonja, it would just feel wrong because they just see, right?
Yeah.
Right?
It is funny how it's like they do have all these licensed properties, but A, some of them have been there for so long that it just feels like them, or B, some of it just feels right there. Although I think just having this conversation, I'm pretty sure this conversation now has 30 variants just because we've been talking about Dynamite for this long.
Yeah, I know. Just to bring it back to IDW. I mean, I'm just saying, there wasn't like wrong to do licensed comics. I mean, everybody does licensed comics, and kids comics. Remember how hot they were when they started doing My Little Pony comics? Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Like there was a time time is a telescope. So, I'd say it was like, it's just before the pandemic, but it's probably like 8 years ago when Boom was doing Adventure Time comics and IDW started to do My Little Pony comics and Dark Horse started to do Avatar, The Last Airbender comics. And people are like, oh, these kids comics are selling really well. And, so they were visionaries. And, Ted did this thing that was called these little mini things. Like they tried a lot of things when Ted was president, because he was like, throw it against the wall and see if it sticks, but with different formats and different products. Right. So they did these little mini comics that they sold at checkout stands, and it was like a little mystery box. And so you'd get some candy, you'd get a little toy, and you'd get a little mini comic. And they sold pretty well for a while.
I don't remember that at all.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't unless you had kids and were going to like Walmart,
That's true.
It was a suburban child-focused product.
It is interesting, though, like bringing up the fact that they don't really have their own originals. I personally don't think a lot of people act, or not a lot of people, some people act like having licenses is like this crime or something like that, like it's a lesser than form. But A, there's been a lot of really cool licensed comics, and B, they're successful. So it's a good foundation to have as a publisher. The problem with it is it's kind of feast or famine. You have them and you're doing great, and then you don't have them and you're doing less great. I'm very interested to see how this plays out, because in my mind, reorienting around the lineup that they have of like Mark Doyle and like Jamie Rich and Heather Antos and all of that, I think that's a pretty good group to follow. And I think that they were already kind of trying to build up that original so they could have more of a foundation that isn't so reliant on the ebbs and flows of the license world.
Yeah, but I mean, do you think there's a place for these untested? Is there a place for more periodicals? I'm not sure.
I don't know. I mean, that's the tricky thing. I mean, we're going to talk about DSTLRY in a little bit, but I mean, DSTLRY is the same thing. It's just,
yeah.
I mean, if you strip out the names for DSTLRY, what is DSTLRY? It's another new publisher in a market that doesn't seem like it needs any more of those. That's a very tough question to answer, and it could be a painful question to answer. At the same time, I don't know. I really like Mark Doyle. I think he's super smart. I think Heather Antos is super smart. I think Jamie's smart. I mean, betting on them, keeping Scott Dunby around, keeping the top shelf crew around. I mean, those are very comic-centric people.
I mean, Scott Dunby, let me give a shout out to this guy. I mean, I tease him now because, I'm like, you're the new Todd Klein. Like, how do you even have room for all your awards? If you go to any award ceremony, which I guess you don't, David, but if you go to the Ringos or the Harveys, they cut out some categories. But I swear to God, Scott Dunby is going to win. The Eisners, it's like his artist editions, things like Parker. I mean, he's just done so many books that are so admired.
Right.
And yeah.
I mean, the admired part is really important, too, because it's, you talk to
and they make money. Hey, listen, they make money. They wouldn't keep doing that if they weren't very profitable.
Well, but or at least in part, because like every artist is like bending over backwards so they can buy every copy of the artist edition that exists. I mean, like the Kevin Nolan one that just came out, everyone's like losing their minds about that.
Right.
And it's interesting because if you want to start a conversation with artists, just tweet about like an artist edition and all of them will just start raving about it. And it's for good reason. They do really good work. It is interesting though, but I mean, like, what do you think? Strip out everything about it. Strip out like the nature of the past few years. Strip out, obviously, it's horrible that 39% of the people were laid off, but what do you think of the move from a purely objective going forward standpoint? Like, how do you see IDW? Do you just see too much headwind given the nature of the market? Or like, do you think that this puts them in a perhaps interesting position?
Well, I would compare it a lot to Oni, which I did before, except that Oni wasn't, Lionforge wasn't publicly held. But, you saw a big, huge contraction at Oni. And then there was this whole period of like, who the hell is running things there? And there was, right? So it was just really, really confusing. And, they finally got it under control. And, and I know all the people there because they used to own the beat. And so, I had some private conversations like, what is going on? And it took a while to get that answer, right? So with IDW, I said this several times, and I just think it really bears emphasis just that, they are, well, they're going to be delisted, but that doesn't mean that they're being taken back private. They're going to be a penny stock. Mm-hmm. Like after you leave the major stock exchanges, I believe, I am so not a stock expert, but I do believe that you become like a penny stock on like there's other little stock exchanges. And they are selling for under a penny. So that would sound about right. Wizard did the same thing. Wizard became public. Remember that? And they were traded as a public stock or as a penny stock. So but I think it's important to understand that the principal shareholders, not the owner, because it's publicly held, but the principal shareholder of IDW is this, company IDT. That's a very successful $1 billion company. And they've gone this far with it, So, I think that the way things went down this week were really shitty. Now, there was a thread on Twitter about the layoffs. And then a lot of people chimed in and said, this is just how tech companies do it now. They call you into a meeting. They say, you're let go. Come, that's it. Goodbye. And then when you get out of the meeting, your email's turned off. I guess it's to stop, mischief or something. So I think the fact that they did it that way, I guess, isn't as shocking. However, when it's a small company of 80 people, that is still pretty fucking shocking. You know what I'm saying? It's like that is the wrong way to do it with a company that small and that close knit, even in the pandemic. So, it's not clear. They bought in the principal shareholder's son to run the company.
I know.
Whether you want to say, no, I'm supposedly, we're negotiating now, just preview, we're negotiating now to do an interview with Davide Jonas. So I look forward to talking to him. Everybody's made the, Kendall, what's his name? Kendall Roy jokes, Fredo jokes, you name it. Bringing in the son is kind of a weird move. But this guy has been very, very involved in a lot of IDT stuff over the years. It seems weird, but maybe it's not that weird. I don't think IDW is going to go away. But my biggest question is, what about the entertainment division?
Right.
Because that's really like, do you remember the whole Winona Earp season 4 debacle?
I honestly barely remember that Winona Earp had a show, let alone 4 seasons of said show.
Well, that's because you've missed out, because let me tell you, this show had a huge following. Yes, it did.
This was on Sci-Fi, right?
Yes, it was. And it had a lot of queer content before that became all the rage. And it had a lot of fans who were really there for the queer content. Mm-hmm. And it definitely, in fact, my entertainment editor was like, oh yeah, let's run this Winona Earp stuff. It's going to do really well. And every time we ran anything about Winona Earp, it did super well. Wow. Because even though it had flown under the radar, this show had a real cult following. So you don't remember, okay. And this, I need to research this to make sure I get it right. So I preface this with saying I'm going by memory. I haven't looked it up. But IDW was trying to get in on the streaming space race, okay, for years. And for whatever reason, they did not seem to comprehend that the problems they were having was because they only had Lock and Key, right? So do you remember all the problems that Lock and Key had? It was supposed to be on one network and they made a pilot, or they were going to make a pilot and then they canceled it. It had like one of these heartbreak stories, and then it came back because they pushed it because it was the biggest gun in their holster, right?
Mhm.
Or whatever the metaphor is. And so they did have Winona Earp, which was based on an Image comic, right? And then it did become this kind of cult hit on Sci-Fi. But because IDW had so much problems getting the Lock and Key show made, they had started to self-finance. Do you remember this part?
Vaguely.
Okay, so I mean, that's why I'm saying I have to look it up to make sure. But my understanding is that they were at least self-financing on, like, they were putting up some of the production costs of these shows, because and Valiant tried to do the same thing. It's like a lot of times when you weren't getting, you're not like Mike Richardson, who's been doing this in Hollywood for nearly 40 years and been very successful at it, or Image, like everybody's selling all their shit, Renfield, whatever. Although was Renfield Image or was it Boom? But anyway.
It was Kirkman, yeah. So it was Skybound.
Yes, yeah. But it flopped anyway. So, but hey, the movie got made, so you got that money. But so they were just not getting anywhere in the space race. So they were like, okay, well, we'll self-finance. We'll put some money into the pot. And so I guess that did work out a little bit more with Lock and Key when it finally got picked up at Netflix. But with Winona Earp, it went on like I think it was the first 3 seasons. Here's where my memory's a little fuzzy. Came out, but it might have been the 3rd season. It was either the 3rd or 4th season. And they were like, oh, we have to shut down production because we're out of money.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it was a big brouhaha at the time and embarrassing as shit, right? And it just showed poor planning. It showed poor planning that they had a hard time getting this season made. And you know what? I'm gonna ask you a question. While you answer it, I'm gonna look this up because I want to make sure I get it right. Were you surprised that that IDW this happened to IDW?
I mean, this isn't going to give you as much time as you expected, because the answer is no. But I mean, the thing is like the past 6 years for IDW have been just tumultuous, and it's kind of, this move kind of felt like a culmination of all of it. And I mean, it really, it's horrible. I mean, like the 39% of your workforce being laid off is terrible. Being done in such a way is even worse. And the fact, I mean, it is encouraging. It seems like they have a plan coming out of it, because I thought, I mean, when that news first hit, I was kind of surprised that it wasn't 39% that proceeded like even more, because things have just been so kind of dire. I mean, there's been encouraging signs in the past couple of years, like the IDW Originals line launching and having like Scott Snyder on board and an array of other big books, but I mean, maybe not big books, but like notable books from notable creators.
Sure. Well, I mean, hey, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Last Ronin has been one of, if not the biggest hit in the direct market over the last year. A couple of years. It's been a massive hit. And
they just launched another new book tied to that series in January. And so they have books that are successful, but at the same time, a lot of publishers have books that are successful that can't carry them.
Right.
So it wasn't surprising. It sucked. It was terrible.
Right. So let me read you. Now I found the story about it. And like anyone who read a story like this about Winona Earp season 4 would not be surprised, right? Filming was meant to begin in February 2019, but was then pushed back. Ask why at the time, a fan on Twitter, Scrofano replied, I don't know anything, unfortunately. All I know is we aren't shooting, and I don't know why. However, a public filing revealed that IDW had to take out some loans as they had a, quote, need for a cash infusion, unquote, to make not only Winona Earp, but V-Wars and the October Faction, both of which were canceled after one season by Netflix, and Lock and Key, recently renewed for season 2. At the time, an IDW spokesperson said, Sci-Fi ordered season 4 of Winona Earp from IDW, is completely committed to the series. This has not changed. However, the filing revealed that Sci-Fi's licensing fee for the show only paid half of Winona Earp's cost.
Oh boy.
Anyway. Yeah.
This is why it's not surprising. These types of stories are just way too common. And I don't know. I mean, I agree with you. Like the Sun taking over was kind of alarming.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. May is lining up to be one of the biggest months ever for Zoop. It's going to feature campaign launches for the Stardust anthology spearheaded by Van Jensen, Jason Copeland's powerhouse Full Tilt, Shannon K. Garrity's Skin Horse, Luciano Vecchio's Sereno, and an art book by the one and only Jorge Molina. Not only that, but you still have time to support Mark Nelson's Thunder Hunters and rising superstar Marco Fontanilli. It takes less than 30 seconds to sign up, and the e-commerce style checkout is easy and intuitive. Add multiple rewards and add-ons into your cart, provide some info during checkout, and you're done. No confusing additional steps in finalizing your pledge, and no post-campaign surveys. And of course, the creators appreciate your support. For creators looking to crowdfund your project, Zoop is currently open for submissions. Email them at hello@wearezoop.com to start a campaign. And now, back to the show.
Let's jump into DSTLRY, because I think you gave us a good intro here, because it is an unusual time for the market. And if anything, It is a time of some level of consolidation, seemingly, in which some publishers are cutting back. Other ones are really struggling to maintain operations as they currently have them. And here we have DSTLRY, DSTLRY, as many people made fun of. But it's, as a person who runs a site named Sketched, I can't say anything because I don't have vowels either. Mm-hmm. It's the new publisher launch from the ex-Comixology pair of David Steinberger and Chip Mosher. Has a massive list of creators on board, including James Tynion IV, Scott Snyder, Tula Lotay, Becky Cloonan, Jock, many more. Investors in it include Kodansha US, Group Delcor. There's like video game experts involved, tech strategists, Lorenzo Di Bonaventuras for some reason involved. Its big hooks are its black label like print product. It's wildly unconventional. Do not call it an NFT digital approach to single issues, but not collections, with its 1 week for sale and then traded on a secondary market method. It has some collectibles elements, and there's a 3% equity share that creators will get. Here's my question for you. You did an interview with David and Chip after it hit. Is this a big deal, a little deal, or somewhere in between?
Somewhere in between, for sure. I mean, I think it's important that David Steinberger and Chip Mosher are back in comics, I mean, I'm David Steinberger. I mean, on my other podcast, More to Come, for Publishers Weekly. Check it out at publishersweekly.com. /comics. We talked about all the things that have gone on in Comixology. And one thing we're always universal about is what a class act David Steinberger is, right? I mean, he just really did a great job from starting it, getting through all the doubts and, derision. I mean, he was treated like a pariah and an outcast, and he just stuck with it, in a very classy way. And, to selling it to Amazon is the American dream, a startup that you sell to a tech giant, and then lose control of and see it taken apart completely. The American dream. And so I think David being back and Chip also, I mean, Chip is just the guy, Chip is, it wouldn't be comics without Chip Mosher.
And he's been in a lot of different roles over the years, and he's done a lot of big things. He was at Boom. Right. He came into Comixology in like the marketing and PR, and then he moved on to running originals, and people love Chip. Yeah, they love Chip. They do. I love Chip. I mean, yeah, we love Chip. So seeing them back, and, depending on what you think of Comixology originals, I mean, I think Comixology Originals was a very, very underrated line. And it was underrated from a business standpoint because you might remember when it first launched out of Amazon, whatever the discourse on Twitter was then, which was probably 2018, 2019, again, pre-pandemic, who knows when it was really. But, they had a big debut launch at San Diego Comic-Con, and it was like, oh, how can you work for Amazon? Amazon has a, cloud software that powers spyware, and, ban them from SPX. And how can you possibly work for Amazon? And it's like, well, they're giving you 100% of the rights. No other company does that except Image. So that's pretty, and paying you a page rate. Nobody does that. Nobody does that. Nobody pays you a page rate and gives you 100% of the rights. So it's pretty much the best fucking deal in comics, right? And then, it's like there's a lot of people who complained about Comixology sponsoring Small Press Expo and Thought Bubble, and whose books are sold on Amazon. And I even said to one of the publishers, it's like, you sell this person's books on Amazon. What would happen if they decided to actually boycott Amazon and not sell their product? And the publisher's like, that would be an absolute disaster, and we'd go out of business. So, I'm not a big fan of posturing that does nothing.
I'm more of a fan of the other thing going on this week, the Writers Guild strike, which is actually fighting for something, I think. I don't know. I support the strike, but yeah.
Can
anyway.
I just say really quick, I'm actually a big fan of your impression you just did a little bit ago because it was hilarious. I love your impression voice of the people who are complaining about Amazon. A+ work, Heidi.
I know.
Big fan.
Oh, thanks. Well, there you go. Anyway, DSTLRY. Yeah. So anyway, they're back. But I mean, I think, I just went through some history because that informs where Chip and David are coming from. And, they're like, oh, we're not doing NFTs, which are called digital collectibles now, by the way. Big secret. Again, if you're listening to this podcast, you're going to find out a big secret about Heidi MacDonald was that I went to NFT NYC and like a few weeks ago, got a press pass, and I went and just to see what the propaganda was, right? They had to use the term NFT in the title of all the panels because, whereas some of the people that I know who do NFTs, which is pretty much everyone every publisher in comics does NFTs, just about, they just don't talk about it. They like to call them digital collectibles or some other term that
they obfuscate it. Yeah.
They do. Yeah.
I have to say, I'm not surprised you went to NFT NYC just because you also, you're a curious person. You went to that metaverse convention that one time before you came on the show. And I remember you, there was like a VR thing or something like that.
Yeah,
you seem like you really like that. But the digital collectible thing is really fascinating because, yeah, sure, maybe it's not built on the blockchain, but I do think that functionally it operates the same as an NFT. And I mean, it may not have the same environmental impact, but if it's a thing that only one person can own and the rights have to be traded and everything like that, it's still conceptually the same thing. But one thing I do want to ask, and I think this is an interesting part of an interesting part of this, and I mentioned this earlier, is that there's a lot of big names involved. Mm-hmm. Do you think that you would still view it as somewhere in between a big deal and a little deal if you just stripped out the names? Because conceptually, what is it? It's a comic publisher that's making some big comics and black label stuff.
Yes. I mean, they do have a different deal. And I mean, I do think it's the names involved that make it a medium-sized deal, right? Because otherwise, I mean, my DMs are full of people who are saying, oh, I don't know whether to sign with Scout or KeenSpot.
Why are your DMs filled with that?
But because people ask my advice,
Oh, okay.
And it's like people, like very super privileged people like you and I, David. I mean, let's face it, we're at the top of the comics journalist chain. If that plane went down, we'd be headless chicken. I think we probably underestimate a little bit what it's like out there if you are just trying, you're known and, just trying to, you're a writer and you can't draw, you're just trying to get your comic out there,
Absolutely.
So, and even you think, well, I'm always like, oh, Pride Man Cave, they're expanding. And then, well, they're not that easy to get into for whatever reason. So anyway, I do think DSTLRY, which is again pronounced not how it's spelled, and I do think that's a flaw. Okay. But I think this is definitely something right now for the top of the comics food chain, for the apex creators, predator creators. But I think it will eventually expand if it is successful.
Yeah, I think that it's an interesting idea. And here's my thing. I support anyone who's going to try something different. This is definitely different. They're not at least doing the same exact thing.
Yes.
Do I completely agree with their approach? I don't know. The digital approach to me seems a little less than ideal. I also find the 3% share is interesting, and I've reached out to them to see if we can chat about this. But the thing about the 3% share that's interesting to me is it's hard not to think about the Social Network and Eduardo Saverin in that situation where it's like, if more creators come in, will that 3% number increase, or will everyone just eternally share that 3%? I don't know.
Yeah,
I mean, either way, it's 3% more than they would have gotten otherwise. And that's the thing is I think that we have a tendency of looking at things like this and naturally picking them apart because they're imperfections. But the thing is, and I saw people getting really mad saying that what happens if DSTLRY goes away and I own that digital collectible and it's no longer powered. And I'm like, they were saying why aren't they answering that question? I'm like, the reason why they're not answering that question is no business goes into business planning falling apart. And the thing is are there flaws or are there conceptual flaws that I don't currently understand? Yeah, sure. But at the same time, It's pretty interesting. I think that there's a possibility there. I do think it's very funny that almost all the creators are Comixology originals or Substack creators, but that kind of makes sense because they're kind of choosing from the same pool. But I would say the thing that was a little surprising to me is I was expecting something maybe a bit more straightforward from the pair, like more on the digital side of things. But maybe that was off the table because the way that their deals with Amazon worked. I don't really know.
Yes, yes, possibly. I mean, look at the two splashiest debuts of the last, the previous, pandemic era, Substack Comics and Zestworld, and like Substack is, I will say Three Moons, Three Worlds just launched their
Emporia.
Their Emporia, very well done, beautiful site, and whatever, they're doing okay. They seem to have a lot of money. They hired a lot of people. They're puttering around. They're Jonathan Hickman. I haven't read these books. I'm not versed enough in their business model to really analyze it, but it's certainly just something that I want to find out more about. And Zestworld. To me, Zestworld, they're very nice people. Everybody working there seems to be treated well, get money, same thing. But where's your business plan? There is no business plan.
I've never understood Zestworld. Like fundamentally, I understand Substack because it's an email newsletter and it's basically trying to monetize an existing audience. Zestworld is kind of like, it's like the everything store where nothing really makes sense. And I've never really understood it, but I actually had a patron question. Scott Hazelwood said he is a regular listener to the More to Come podcast, which you can find at publishersweekly.com/comics. And I enjoyed their recent discussion of DSTLRY. The impression I get is that with the people involved, that publisher has some promise, but the gimmicky nature of some of their business strategy seems off-putting or downright dumb. Since Heidi has covered so many different publishers over the years, what makes her feel that a publisher is setting themselves for long-term success versus just grabbing attention with gimmicks?
Well, look at Zestworld. Now they said they were doing NFTs, and they came out just as the market was crashing. So I don't know if they have or haven't. All the creators there are obviously aware of whatever it is they're doing, and but they don't have anything except they've done zero marketing, and like they just put out these comics on their newsletters, and wonderful people like Alex Segura and Phil Jimenez are like, hey, my new book is out, and that's it. Have you ever heard anyone talk about reading a Zestworld comic or say, oh, I'm a fan of blah blah?
I have done many searches to find those people, and near as I can tell, they don't exist. And I've been approached by people to talk about Zestworld stuff, and most of the time when people reach out to me, I just say I don't understand Zestworld, so I don't really want to talk about it. They just need a page that says this is what we are. Anyway, sorry to sidetrack you.
Well, no, but it's interesting, and I think you've got to be honest about the world we live in. And maybe you and I are not into digital ownership. Okay. Maybe you and I come from a world where certainly I predate anything digital, my age. And, to me, it's not important. And however, I will say that some, people today, Zennials, are born into a world where this, they're not ever going to know a world where this didn't exist. Right. And I do think for some people, digital ownership is a very important concept. Okay.
Wait, can I make a quick aside really quick? We talked about video games before we started recording. And for younger people, like Fortnite skins or like Roblox cosmetics and things like that, those aren't digital. Those are real.
Yes.
And so the thing is it may not be important to us, but it is important to a certain audience.
Yes. And I think, you're not that old. So, but I'm not going to be here old fart myself too much and say I understand. If I play Marvel Strike Force, I just unlocked my Namor costume, right? And it was hard. I had to blitz a lot to get that costume. So I get it, and everybody mocked the phrase that they used in my interview of drop culture. But guess what, David? I see people lined up outside. Oh, what's the name of the store? It's like a candle store. It's not Bed Bath and Beyond. It's Bath and Body Works. Bath
Okay.
and Body Works. I've seen people lined up outside there to get some candle that they really want. Okay. So it's like, I mean, I understand the offense of comparing a comic book or a graphic novel or a piece of art, creativity to a candle, a smelly candle, or a shoe. But people do one thing Chip and David are not wrong about is people enjoy the chase. People enjoy a safe chase.
The only thing I'm going to say, like, I saw the drop culture line, and that kind of threw me off just because, yes, people enjoy the chase. I mean, comic people love enjoying the chase. Think about people who
Yes.
go through every back issue that they can find anywhere they find back issues. But there's a difference between, and I think this is probably part of the problem with NFTs also, is just like, there's no physical reminder. Like if you have like a high-end NFT or like a comic that
High-end NFT.
whatever, or a comic that Scott Snyder previously owned that Distillery published, who are you going to show that to? You're just going to bring up your phone and be like, Scott Snyder used to own this. Like part of the thing about drop culture is like, or like back issues is like, if I find Incredible Hulk 181 and I buy it for $5, I will show it to literally every human being I possibly can. You can't do that with a digital item. And so I understand the comparison, just like I understand what was the thing that they said? StubHub for comics, right? I understand the shorthand. I don't know if it totally works the same. And yet they haven't even launched yet. So TBD, right?
Right. And here's one thing that really affects all of these. Okay. And affects all these other stories that we've been talking about. Just today, there was a big bank failed. And, there has been a huge drying up of VC capital. Okay.
Yeah.
Like we just went through this period where, bored people at home with millions or even billions of dollars sitting around like, what do I do with this? Well, I'll make a comic book company. Let me invest in a comic book company. That sounds like a good thing to do. Or, I'm bored. Let me do that. And, that's what happens sometimes, right? And we're just, with VC money drying up and capital drying up, we're just seeing people tighten their belts, And I mean, God bless Distillery. Yeah, I mean, they have investors who are, they have a very personal connection with. So it's not where they just went out and did a round and, Metallica's investment fund decided to invest in them.
Ooh, Vulcan a drive-by. Dang.
Yeah, but I mean, hey, look, I'm not putting down Vault. I'm good for them. Good for them at this point in time when you got somebody to invest. I hope I hope you survive the experience, right? So we're just seeing a lot of chickens come home to roost right now. We're seeing a lot of empty hen houses. We're seeing a lot of foxes looking lean and hungry because there's no hens left. And guess what? I'm going to make myself an omelet, but I got to break some eggs.
I do think it's interesting, though. The investors part is an interesting thing to me. I get Kodansha, established relationship. Delcor, established relationship.
Right.
Like some of the ones, the name, like Lorenzo Di Bonaventura. What the hell? Like a part of me, I like when I see that list of names, I'm impressed, but I'm also like, what are they investing in? Because I like as a publisher, like what makes that more attractive than a Vault or something like that? Besides the names. Also, I guess conversely, you could just say that like, well, Metallica and like that. I forgot what they called was it an activist investor and then invested in Vault also? There was something like that. But anyway, it's like clearly like people are looking for places to put money and it's a people game, and David Steinberger and Chip Mosher know a lot of people.
Yeah. And I mean, they've been very successful at everything they've done. So, either it's going to be the Dunning, what is the Peter Principle, if anybody remembers that, whatever they call it now.
Yeah.
Or they'll do fine. I mean, they have a lot of support in the industry. And look, I just wanted the activist investors. It's like, this vulture capitalism that we're living through right now, part of the Writers Guild strike. It's like, when CEOs are being paid $200 million a year, and writers are being told you can't even work a week on this show, or we need to make the room smaller. It's like, my favorite is Bed Bath and Beyond, because I was reading, there was a Bed Bath and Beyond right up the street from me, and their downfall started before the pandemic when an activist investor started moaning and groaning. And so because he wasn't, he's only making $2,000 instead of $2,500, right? And then they brought in a new CEO, and he had this whole idea to do house brands because he came from Target. But Target house brands are cute. They're like really cute stuff from great designers. And Bed Bath and Beyond's house brands were shit, right? I mean, I would go there and try to buy some sheets, and I'm like, why are these sheets so crappy? I just want to buy I just want a sheet. I just want a nice blankie.
It's hard to get good sheets, man. It's hard to get. I was just
It
shopping.
Is. It actually is.
Yeah.
It's very hard, especially depending on the size of your mattress. But anyway, so that started it. And then came the pandemic. And then, they got supply problems because they were doing all their own sourcing. And then, it just was like missed problem. Then another activist investor came up and did more things. And now they're bankrupt. And now they're closing all their stores. And now it's done. Thanks, Mr. Activist Investor. You did a great fucking job. Why weren't you just isn't there any way to be just happy with a company that's successful and does well without this growth?
I think modern history has shown us that the answer is no, unfortunately. But I think it depends on what level of company you are. The Beat? Sketched? We're happy, right? There we go. Invest in us.
Yes, we are. Well, the Beat's in a great growth period.
I love it. And you got all kinds of things cooking. I do have to say one last thing on DSTLRY. I mentioned it earlier, like I was surprised that they didn't do something a little bit more straightforward. It is interesting to view this move through the prism of the current digital landscape, because like Comixology's corpse is just like ambling onwards. And then you have Global Comics and Omnibus like about to launch, I think. And it's interesting where like if you had a really well-funded kind of big outfit that had like names like this behind it, probably would have done really well. But maybe they couldn't do it. Again, maybe that was contractually not something that they could get into, and this is an area that they could get into.
Well, I mean, this is pure speculation. And, I'm good friends with the folks at Global Comics and the folks at Omnibus. I like them all a lot. And Global Comics is extant. They're just launching a new app, but I mean, it's been launching for a long time. One of my writers did a test drive actually of it. And, Omnibus is trying to launch. And, what I said before about VC drying up is very bad for those kind of startups, right?
Yeah.
And so I hope they're out there. And I'm going to mention Inky Pen.
I saw your article about them today.
So, and that's very mysterious. I don't really know what's going on there, but I will say this is, they only do digital comics for the Switch, but they've been around a while, and they just apparently Kodansha hired them to do their website. So, they could be a dark horse entrant in the digital comic space race.
Yeah. I mean, it is certainly a race. It is interesting, though. I liked your phrase of saying Global Comics has been trying to wait. They've been launching an app for a long time. That is a funny phrase. Like, I feel like if you're launching an app, it's just an active thing. They've been attempting. Yeah. I don't know, whatever. But
they've been promoting it. They've been trying to promote it. So.
And they have. I mean, honestly, they have a lot of material on there. That's one thing that they got going for them, is they have a lot of comics on that platform. But all right, there's a lot of other subjects we can get into. I'm going to skip through them because there's only so much we can get into.
Yes.
The short answer is, one thing I do want to note, comics are still doing pretty well. BookScan, the BookScan report that Brian Hibbs did was excellent. And it was mostly flat in a larger market where print was actually down in 2022. So good job, comics, or at least good job, manga, and good job, Scholastic. Yes. My God. I'm curious, before we go, are there any other stories that are standing out to you right now? Like, is anything else interesting besides the things we've kind of alluded to and talked about here today?
Well, yes, because something else I did that was I went to the local, I live a few blocks away from the School of Visual Arts, and they had their fresh meet. It was the first time they'd done it in person since before the pandemic. This is a show where the seniors, although this year they opened it up to even sophomores, and I think there was a few freshmen there, but it's kind of a little Comic-Con. So it's basically they go, they table, they learn how to table, they call, they invite professors come, and they invite regular people, so it's just part of learning how to table. So I went there. It was on last Friday, and I was just talking to the kids, and like an old person, I said, what do you think of this? Do you read manga? Like just horribly like grandma going in and quizzing these 20 somethings. I mean, I asked a few of them. I mean, I haven't written this up. Maybe I won't, or maybe I'll just talk about this podcast. But my question to them was like, who is the publisher you would like to be published by? Or what is the platform that you would like your comics to be seen on? Right? Like, I think that's a good, if you're graduating from cartooning school,
You want to know where to put things.
Right. Yeah, you've got to, what's your goal? Or are you an aimless graduate, right? And some of them were aimless, about half were aimless. And then the other half were first, second. It was a mix of first, second, Dark Horse, which shocked me, and Image. And then a few were like Webtoon, but very few. And like one said like Fantagraphics, John Corley, one said Silver Sprocket was their dream company. But I was a little surprised that there wasn't more Webtoon. And the thing is, though, that they all read manga. And I asked, well, have you ever held a periodical? And they're like, well, they're so hard to get into. And, just all, I mean, I don't think people at Marvel and DC and even Dark Horse and Image are completely ignorant of this fact. But I mean, they don't make manga, okay? The comics that they make are not manga style because I think that is seen as cultural appropriation. I think manga is made mostly by Japanese people, okay? So they might make manga influenced comics, right? But I didn't see anybody who was doing manga. Maybe it was one or two exceptions.
There is a DC like the DC manga that's coming, like they announced at Comics Pro that was published in Japan and they're publishing here.
Yes, but I'm just saying, I don't think Occidental comics, American comics, North American, US, Western comics quite realize how all pervasive this manga style is and how powerful anime and manga. And I did get some press release. I'm going to forget what it is. And I meant to write it up, but then I had to run out of the house. But it was like some basketball player is doing some manga or something like that. And I was just like, this is what it is, And I mean, this is just a profound, like revolution that's been going on for 5 or 6 years. And I wrote about like during the Super Bowl, and you work in advertising, right? Or marketing.
Yeah.
I was surprised at the Super Bowl that none of the ads really had this, they weren't touched by the anime. The fact that anime was the fastest rising thing that people watched during the pandemic. But who did was Rihanna, because she's into anime.
Yeah.
And she had all kinds of references to it in her set, right? Like right down to the red jumps. It wasn't that Akira, right?
I think
like
so.
She comes up,
well,
yeah.
And it didn't Creed 3, from what I understand, Michael B. Jordan had a lot of anime influences in that. I haven't seen it yet, but I heard that there was like a lot of influences in there. It is interesting how those things kind of pop up in surprising places. And then, I don't know. I mean, as much as advertising wants to feel like it's on the bleeding edge, I think sometimes there's some laggards there that maybe anime style is not something that they can get across to like the companies.
But I'm just saying, anime style is such a huge part of youth culture right now. It's one of the defining aspects of youth culture in the 21st century.
I mean, I was just in France, which is as insane of a anime and manga country as you can find outside of Japan.
They buy more manga there than they do in the United States. But anyway, I'm sorry, continue.
417 million per Debayoki on Twitter versus 222 million, I want to say.
Yep.
It was crazy. Like you walk down the Champs-Élysées and there's like fashion homes that have like My Hero Academia collaborations advertised big, like saying, come and try our new My Hero Academia collection. I'm like, what? I don't need a Gucci, like, I don't know, Naruto bag or something like that.
Yes, you do. I do.
I kind of do.
Where?
I kind of do. Anyways, I mean, it is pretty wild. That is one of the things that was really astonishing was just like, I mean, like I wrote about this in a piece that ran today, but I mean, it's like you go into train station convenience stores and there's stand-ups for Spy Family. There's huge racks of manga just everywhere. And it is kind of amazing. I do think one of the interesting wrinkles about what you said, though, is that all of them read manga, but they want to work for First, Second, and Dark Horse and publishers like that. I do wonder how much the webtoon part of it is fear of monetization because, I mean...
Yes, I think Webtoon and Tapas have begun to get bad reputation. And that was the one thing I was really struck me about these young cartoonists. And, some of them are so accomplished. I mean, if you had taken these SVA graduates and undergrads and dropped them into San Diego Comic-Con, the first one I went to in 1984, like they would have been the best cartoonists there, except for like 5 people, like Jack Kirby and 5 other people. And but they're very savvy. They're very savvy about the business. I mean, they're at SVA. They're being taught this. The curriculum there contains a lot of information for them. And I do think they seem very wary of Webtoon. And maybe it's just because of the reputation that they have and the fear of monetization. And, I think For Second has a stellar reputation. There's only been a couple of teeny tiny little things that they've ever done that they got called out on.
And most of the time they corrected it too.
They corrected it and apologized the next day. They were they really behaved as ethically as you possibly can in this situation, right?
I just thought of something with Dark Horse too, though. One thing that's interesting about Dark Horse is it's the only publisher you mentioned that also publishes manga.
That's correct. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why it got mentioned a lot. Although people are like, well, just as Berserk. And I was like, they do some other ones too. They publish. They're one of the vanguard, they're a pioneer in publishing manga in the United States, right? Mm-hmm. With Viz. And but yeah, I think when we are doing this in 5 years, if we're both still doing it.
Hopefully we don't fly in a plane in Alaska anytime soon.
No, right. Stay away from Milton. The 3 of us must not get on the same plane. But I think we're going to look back and everything is going to have changed because of this. I do think that this manga anime generation, the way, and it's at its barest point is just how the stories are told, mm-hmm. and how it's the satisfying chunk on steroids, David.
It's the best of both worlds, right? It's a constant periodical that is in a satisfying chunk form because, right. I mean, a lot of these books are coming out every few months, basically, and you're getting an entire tankobon, like, digest-sized book, and it's a lot more than a single issue, but it comes out frequently enough that you never forget about it either.
Yeah, and I mean, if you stay up late and log into Twitter, you see, like, things trending that are super duper, One Piece will always be trending when a new volume comes out, discussing everything that happens in it on Twitter. And, TikTok, there's so many platforms where all this stuff is being discussed. I will say one thing, like I went and hung out with some children and a 4-year-old, my 4-year-old cousin. And I, whenever I go hang out with the kids, I bring a big stack of books. They might be a little too old for them, but, they can keep them around in the library or look at the pictures. I have a lot of kids' books, right? And I bought the latest Dog Man and I started to read it, and the kids were silent while I was reading it, right? Because it's just so compelling. Dog Man is super compelling. And then my cousin texted me later on. She's like, after you left, when Ned was going to sleep, he asked to have Dog Man read to him.
There you go.
Yeah.
Creating another generation of comic fans, as per usual, Heidi. But we can keep going on forever about all this.
I know.
As long as we don't get on the same plane at the wrong time, we're going to be good. We'll do this again.
That's right. All right, we will.
Heidi, that's all I got for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about DSTLRY, manga, Ike Perlmutter, your icologist nature, and everything else. I appreciate you taking the time.
Always a pleasure, David. Always a pleasure. I hope it takes a long time to store up as much seismic news as we've had the last 2 months. So
no more month and a half stretches like this. No more.
Yes.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with The Beat's Heidi MacDonald. You can find MacDonald on Twitter and her work at The Beat. Big thanks to Deanna Chapman, who stepped in to edit this week's podcast. If it sounds better than usual, it's because of her. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel. And when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site Sketched at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by following on Twitter and Instagram at @sketchcomic or following me at @slicefriedgold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Darcy Van Polges, Kevin Bides, Tom Evans, Natalie Mockery, Travis Gibb, Reed Beeman, Kelly Sudaconic, Max Wood, Jeremy Lambert, Brian, Chris Doré, Nir Levy, Dennis Hoffman, Jason Hussa, Kieran Gillen, Jonathan Kent Uratam, Henry Johnson, Django Boren, James Dinan IV, Chris Langford, Jason Wood, Tom Peachy, Ben Damstead, Rom V, Nick Walker, Patrick Coyle, Isaac Oren, Scott Carpenter, Rent Narb Studios Comics, Capes and Tights Podcast, Klaus Vandeven, Brian, Submen Industries, Jack Mulqueen, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Canadian by Proxy, Bradley Rader, Carl Troy, Brandon DePillis, Patrick Brower, Declan Shalvey, Dan Garino, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, Nick Bennett, Birdcage Comics Cafe, Susanna Polo, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Stephen Hall, Philip Myra, Chris Pachalo, Torrin Grumbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Chris Rata, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Akil Wilson, Alex Demetriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Gift, Sean Kirkham, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwan, Vita Ayala, Akil, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, David Kelly, Nick Polito, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogert, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxwell, Cliff Chang, Colin McMahon, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Adam Highfill, Fiona Staples, Mark Abnett, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Wolfpack for letting me use their song Outro as the song's opening theme, and to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's outro and ad music just for the show. Check out both their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.